So, before engaging in trade, what was happening? US was producing 160 computers and 3,400 tons of wheat. And then US asked Japan to give 110 computers, and in return, Japan will give 700 tons of wheat. So, if you do this adjustment, that means you are importing 110 and exporting 700 wheat. If you add, this is the figure. So, 270 units of computer and 2,700 unit of tons of wheat that the US is able to produce and consume. Now, look at the new point. The blue point is going beyond the PPF. Why this line, why this point is above the PPF, can you think of? If you multiply 270 by 100, how many labor hours you need? How many labor hours you need? 27,000. Okay. So, US need 27,000 hours of labor to produce these many units of computer had the US produced on its own. Similarly, 2,700 tons of wheat requires 2,700 multiplied by 10 is another 27,000 hours of labor. So, that means to produce 270 computers and 2,070 tons of wheat requires 27,000 plus 27,000 equals to 54,000 hours of labor. But US is having only 50,000 labor hour per month available. That is why this combination of computer and wheat is non-attainable for the US had the US not engaged in trade. Okay. So, that means this point, since it is non-attainable, this blue point you see, it is going above the PPF. So, that means a point which was non-attainable earlier. Why is this feasible? It is feasible because of trade. That is why trade makes the US better off. Okay, it is very simple to verify. You just simply multiply 270 by 100, 2,700 by 10 and see how many hours of labor is actually required to produce these many computers and these many tons of wheat. You see that is beyond 50,000 labor hours which was available for the US. Now, you come to Japan. Japan was producing only 240 computers and 0 wheat. Now, after trade, what is happening? Exporting 110 and importing 700 tons of wheat. So, 130 and this is 700 tons of wheat. Now, similarly, if you multiply 130 by 125 and 700 by 25, you will see that that will be more than 25,000 which was available earlier for Japan. So, that means for Japan also this point, that means 130 and 700, this point lies beyond the PPF of Japan. If you recall earlier, when half of the labor force was devoted for Japan to produce computer and wheat, Japan was producing 600 tons of wheat and 120 units of computer. With trade, Japan is now consuming 130 and it is 700. So, that means look at this. Earlier, It was 250 and 2500, half labor force. You recall we said initially half labor force was for this, half labor force for computer, and then 270 and 2700. So that means compared to the no trade situation, there is a net gain of 20 computers for the US and 200 tons of wheat for the US. And this 270 and 2700, this point, that is why lying above the PPF. If you calculate for Japan, what is happening? Earlier, without trade, it was 120 and 600. With trade, 130 and 700. So 10 units of computer and 100 tons of wheat is the gain for Japan. That is why we said trade makes everyone better off. Now, what is the one thing we have to keep in mind? I will like to go back once again to the offer that US made. US said, you give me 110 units of computer, in return I will give 700. So that means when you divide 700 by 110, it is coming around 6.4. Okay, so something around 6. Now, why this is acceptable? It is acceptable because trade happens at these terms of, this is called terms of trade. Okay, this is called terms of trade. US is offering 700 tons of wheat for 110 units of computer. So that is why it is called terms of trade. You divide 700 by 110, so it would be something around 6 point, more than 6. Since this value is more than 10, which is the opportunity cost of for the US, opportunity cost of wheat opportunity cost of computer in terms of wheat is 10 for the US. So US is offering a value which is less than 10, and this value is acceptable for the US because this is more than 5. So a terms of trade which is more than 5 and less than 10 would be a meaningful terms of trade for trade to happen. Please keep this thing in mind. So not any terms of trade would be acceptable or a meaningful terms of trade for trade to happen. It should be more than the opportunity cost of one country and less than the opportunity cost of another country. Okay. So by selling, it is like this. So opportunity cost of, if I think that opportunity cost is the price, that means the price, the domestic price for computer in Japan is 5, and Japan is getting a price of computer which is around 6. So Japan is getting a better price, that is why Japan is interested to sell computer. Similarly, opportunity cost of opportunity cost of computer in Japan, in the US is 10. But when it is importing from Japan, it is getting a price which is 6. So that is why import is beneficial for the US and export is beneficial for the Japan. Because Japan is getting a better price in the global market, US is also getting a better price in the global market. So global price of computer is higher than Japan's domestic price of computer. That is why Japan is interested to export computer, to sell computer. Similarly, US is getting a cheaper price for computer in the global market, and that is why US is exporting computer from the world market. Now you can easily think of, if the price is higher than the upper bound or lower than the lower bound, then trade will not happen. Suppose US is offering a price which is 4. Would it be acceptable to Japan? No. Because Japan is getting a price of computer in its own country itself is 5. So that means by sacrificing one computer, Japan is getting 5 tons of wheat in its own country. Why should Japan accept 4 tons of wheat? So Japan will not accept these terms of trade 4 because it is below its the price what is prevailing in its own country. Similarly, if Japan demands 12 tons of wheat for one computer, would US will sell that? No. Because US feel anyway I am getting a price which is 10 here. So that means by sacrificing one to get one extra unit of computer, I have to sacrifice only 10 tons of wheat. But Japan is demanding 12 tons. So that is not acceptable for Japan. So 12 which is more than 10 is not acceptable. 4 which is less than 5 is also not acceptable. So ATOT must lie between 5 and 10. Suppose another deal, US is asking Japan, if you give me 100, even Japan gives 100 units of computer for 700 tons of wheat, still it is meaningful because 700 divided by 100 it is 7. It is still less than 10, but more than 5. Okay. So, a meaningful terms of trade should lie between the two opportunity costs value. It should not lie beyond this. Okay. It should not lie beyond this. If it lies below the lower value and above the higher value, then either both the countries will sell or both the countries will buy. Okay, either both the countries will sell or both the countries will buy. That is the case. So where do these gains from trade coming from? The gains come from either absolute advantage, the ability to produce goods using fewer inputs. The US has an absolute advantage in both wheat production and computer production. Okay. So which country has absolute advantage? Producing one computer requires 125 labor hours in Japan, but only 100 in the US. So US has an absolute advantage in both the goods. That is the question we raised earlier. Why should then both the countries gain from trade? Because they have differential comparative advantage. Look at this. Absolute advantage measures the cost of a good in terms of the input required to produce it. Another measure is in terms of the opportunity cost, as we discussed. Okay, opportunity cost of a computer is the amount of wheat that could be produced using the labor needed to produce one computer. So comparative advantage means you have a lower opportunity cost to produce that good. The ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another producer. So which country has comparative advantage in producing computer? Obviously, to answer this question, we have to get the opportunity cost of both the countries. So it is 10 tons of wheat in the US because producing one computer requires 100 hours of labor. And with 100 hours of labor, how many computers you can make? Sorry, how many tons of wheat you can make? 10 tons. So, if I sacrifice 1 unit of computer, I will get 100 hours of labor. With that 100 hours of labor, I can get additional 10 tons of wheat. That is a very simple way to calculate opportunity cost. Okay. Technically also you can get it by rise over run. Just find out the slope of the curve and opportunity cost. To measure opportunity cost of a good, you have to measure that good along the x-axis. So, when computer is measured along the x-axis, you divide rise over run. That means the 5000 divided by 500 for the context of US, you will get 10 tons of wheat. Similarly, one computer production in the US requires 150 hours of labor. And if you sacrifice producing one computer, 150 hours of labor will be released. With that 150 hours of labor, how many tons of wheat Japan would be able to produce? 125 divided by 25, because 1 ton of wheat requires 25 hours of labor. So, additional 5 tons of wheat Japan will get if it sacrifices one computer. That is why opportunity cost of computer is only 5 tons of wheat. Okay. That is why we can say that Japan has a comparative advantage in computer production. 5 is less than 10. Okay. Now, if I ask you another question, is it possible to have a comparative advantage for both the commodities for a particular country? Can Japan have comparative advantage in both wheat and computer production? No. Because it is a relative, right? If opportunity cost of computer in terms of weight is less than opportunity cost of than US, it is not possible that Japan will again have lower opportunity cost for wheat production as well. That is not possible. So, that means even though a country can have absolute advantage in both, it cannot have comparative advantage in both the commodities, because it is defined in terms of opportunity cost. If I have lower opportunity cost for computer, obviously I must have higher opportunity cost for wheat production. That is why having lower comparative advantage, or having lower opportunity cost for both the product is not possible. So, absolute advantage is not necessary for comparative advantage. That is what we learn. Okay. In this particular example, even though the US has absolute advantage in both the commodities, Japan has comparative advantage in producing computers. That is what we learn. So, gains from trade arise from comparative advantage. That means differences in opportunity cost. We can think of, as I told you earlier, opportunity cost can be treated as a price for the product in home country. When I am saying opportunity cost of computer is 5 tons of wheat in Japan, that means we can think of price of computer in Japan is 5 tons of wheat. That is why the offer made by the US is attracting for Japan, because Japan is getting a better price for its computer in the global market. That price is more than 5. Okay, that country is more than 5. If it is less than 5, suppose US is offering 4 tons of wheat, then Japan will also say, oh my god, it requires 5 tons of wheat if I produce here. So, if I get a cheaper price, then I will also export computer. So that means when the terms of trade lies below the lower limit, that means below 5 in this case, both the countries would like to export. Japan is saying I have to sacrifice only 5 units of wheat if I produce computer. So, no need of producing computer now. Okay. So, that is how we have to see the terms of trade must lie within the interval 5 and 10. Okay. If it is lower than 10, instead of exporting computer, Japan will also say that I will also import computer. Okay. Japan will also now import computer because now it is not profitable. So, that offer, if the US says that for a unit of computer I will give you 4 tons of wheat, that is not acceptable. Okay, Japan will not export computer. When country specialize in the goods in which it has a comparative advantage, total production in all countries is higher and the world's economic pie is bigger and all countries can gain from trade. With this example, we saw that total production for computer and wheat with trade is higher than the total production of computer and wheat without trade. So that means when production of both the commodities increases, size of the economic pie is increasing. That is why trade makes everyone better off. That is the reason. Okay. And the same applies to even individual producers. Suppose we have a farmer and we have a rancher. Okay. Farmer might be having comparative advantage in producing, let's say, potato, and rancher might be having comparative advantage in producing meat. Even though it might be possible that rancher is having absolute advantage in both potato and meat production, still farmer and rancher, they can engage themselves in mutually beneficial trade since comparative advantage differs. Farmer might be having a comparative advantage in potato production, while the rancher might be having a comparative advantage in cattle production. So, if they engage in trade based on this comparative advantage, that will make both farmers and the rancher better. Okay? But to engage in trade, once again I repeat, the terms of trade must lie within the interval of two opportunity costs. If it goes beyond, then either both the parties will export or both the parties will import. That will be the case. Okay? In our previous example, when the opportunity cost of producing computer is 5 tons of wheat for Japan and US is offering a value which is more than 5, then it is acceptable. Japan is exporting wheat and importing computer. But if the US offers only 4 tons of wheat, then Japan will not accept that. Okay? Japan will not export computer and import computer, rather Japan will also wants to export only. Okay. So, this is another example. Argentina and Brazil each have 10,000 hours of labor per month. In Argentina, producing 1 pound of coffee requires 2 hours and producing 1 bottle of wine requires 4 hours. Okay. So, now in Brazil, producing 1 pound of coffee requires 1 hour, producing 1 bottle of wine requires 5 hours. So, we can easily now understand from this information. Now, it is you can take this as an assignment. You can do this at home. You can draw the PPF of both Argentina and Brazil. How will you draw? For Argentina, devote all your 10,000 hours of labor for coffee production. How many coffee you will get? 5,000. If you divide entire 10,000 by 4, so that means what will happen? So, you will get 2,500 units of wine. So, if you measure coffee in the x-axis, wine in the x-axis, coffee in the y-axis, you can easily get the PPF. Same way you can get the PPF for Brazil. Now, what is the opportunity cost of wheat? Opportunity cost of wine in terms of coffee. That means if I sacrifice, you can divide this by rise over run, same way. So, Brazil has an absolute advantage in coffee because producing coffee requires only 1 labor hour, but Argentina requires 2. Argentina has a comparative advantage in wine because Argentina's opportunity cost of wine is 2 pounds of coffee. Okay? Because the 4 labor hours required to produce a bottle of wine instead of producing 2 pounds of coffee. And Brazil's opportunity cost of wine is 5 pounds of coffee. Okay? That is what. How will you calculate this? Very simple. I will remind you once again that what is the opportunity cost of wine? If Brazil sacrifices producing 1 unit of wine, it will get 5 hours of labor. With that 5 hours of labor, how many coffee it can produce? It can produce 5 units of coffee. Okay, because 1 pound of coffee requires only 1 hour. So, Brazil can produce 5 pounds. So, that is why we can say that opportunity cost of wine in terms of coffee is 5 pounds of coffee. Opportunity cost of wine is 5 tons of coffee. Similarly, if Argentina sacrifices 1 bottle of wine production, Argentina will get 4 hours of labor. With that 4 hours of labor, it will get only 2 pounds of coffee. So, that means Argentina has a lower opportunity cost of wine in terms of coffee. So, that is what we are saying. So, Argentina has a comparative advantage in wine production because it sacrifices only 2 pounds of coffee. Okay. And Brazil has opportunity cost of wine which is 5 pounds of coffee. That is why Argentina has a comparative advantage in coffee wine production. Similarly, Brazil has a comparative advantage in coffee production. So, these are the things that we have to remember. So, that means using, or if we summarize, using this production possibility frontier, we can easily determine whether trade is possible or not and what is the direction of the trade. Simply, we have to draw the PPF. Slope of the PPF will show opportunity cost. Lower the opportunity cost, higher is the comparative advantage. So, even though a country may have absolute advantage in both, it can have comparative advantage only in one commodity. So, the country with lower opportunity cost in a particular commodity will have comparative advantage in that product, and that country will export that particular commodity because it is cheaper in its own country. And the other country will import it. So, in that way, a comparative advantage based on opportunity cost determines the direction of trade. That means which country will export what. Okay, country will export that product in which it has lower opportunity cost. That means comparative advantage. So, comparative advantage is the basis for gains from trade. With trade, the size of the economic pie increases because production of both the commodities increases. Okay, and opportunity cost can be treated as the price for a product. I once again repeat. So, a meaningful terms of trade is the one which lies within the interval of two opportunity cost value, higher and lower. If it lies beyond, that means if it goes below the lower level or above the higher level, then either both the countries will export or both the countries will import. Trade will not happen. To have trade, one country must export and another country must import. If all of them wants to export computer, then that is not a meaningful trade. If all of them wants to import computers, then also it is not a meaningful trade. Okay, so that is why we must check the terms of trade whether it is lying within the interval or not. Okay, with this we are closing our discussion today, wherein we learned the gains from trade based on the simple tool of production possibility frontier, which can define the opportunity cost of producing a commodity and thereby the comparative advantage of a country.